This is week 16 of our journey on baby steps, and I think it's important to address OCD and pregnancy this week. OCD is obsessive compulsive disorder, and for some of you, you might know that I've suffered from OCD since childhood. In fact, I come from a family where several members suffer from OCD, some more severe than others. Now, I've gone through the necessary exposure therapies since I was in my 20s to defeat a lot of the compulsions, especially the germ contamination fears that I had. And that's not to say that I don't have the intrusive fears coming into my mind. The difference is that I just am able to not pay attention to it until I became pregnant. Now, we know that there are two periods in a person's life if you are genetically vulnerable to OCD, where you're going to have more of a risk factor in experiencing OCD. One is during puberty, and the other is during pregnancy. Both of these time periods are vulnerable periods because that's when hormones are surging in your body. And we know that there's a hormonal imbalance and a hormonal influence for some people with OCD. So for me, one of my worst symptoms was contamination fears. And at my worst, during my teen years, I was bathing and showering and washing anywhere between 12 to 15 times a day. Each time had a specific sequence where everything had to be followed in order, and if it wasn't followed in that particular order, I would have to go back and restart the whole process. So I would be spending many hours showering. And it's funny because my parents would even joke about how much water I've wasted and their high water bill because of my OCD. However, coming back to what we're talking about in terms of the pregnancy, what I've noticed is that I have been a lot more protective of my environment and my space, especially when it comes to germs and infections and bacteria. And at first I was a little concerned that I was getting back into my previous OCD compulsions, because what I was doing was I was decontaminating. I was disinfecting a lot of the space that I felt was contaminated. So for example, when I got on the plane and I was flying, and I had never even done this before, even when I was suffering from OCD, I made sure to get disinfectant wipes. And the first thing I did when I got on the plane was wiped everything down, from the seat belt, the buckle, to the tray table, to my armchair, to the buttons that all the fingers would be touching, from everyone else who had flown before you. I would make sure that I wasn't around people who were sick, and people who were sick, I would tell them not to come over, or if they did come over, then I would immediately disinfect right after they leave. And I was a little concerned. I was getting a little bit compulsive again. However, then I gave it a different perspective. I had to look at the whole picture rather than just those points in time, because the reality is, when you're pregnant, you're going to be less immune to infections. Your immune system is just going to be a lot less effective because a lot of the energy is being diverted to your embryos, to your fetus, to your baby. So therefore, you just don't have a lot of immunity to a lot of the infections and bacteria and illnesses out there. And the worst part is if you do get sick, you cannot use any medication, or there are some medications that you can use, however, very sparingly. So being sick while pregnant can feel like a nightmare. And as I said last week, I've been dealing with this sinus infection for the past 7 weeks and 8 weeks now, and it hasn't really gone away. So what I realized was that, I'm not really disinfecting every part of my life. I'm not doing it 24/7. I'm not disinfecting like I was when I was really suffering from OCD, where I would always get the urge and always get the feeling, and I would be washing multiple times all the time, and everything I was scanning for danger, and I would see danger around me all the time. Right now, it's not that way. Right now, what I see is that only when people are sick around me, only when I go into environments where it's known to be highly contaminated, such as the airplane, that I use the disinfectant wipes. So, you have to be able to balance what is appropriate for your current circumstance and what would be extreme. And if you have bouts of OCD that you feel flaring up during your pregnancy, give yourself a quick assessment. Determine, is this happening all the time, or is it during certain periods where it seems pretty reasonable for you to be more vigilant of your environment, more vigilant of what you're doing? So find that balance. And if there isn't the balance, then perhaps this is a time for you to seek more help, consult with a professional. You can always go to the International OCD Foundation, which is iocdf.org, or the Anxiety and Depression Association of America, adaa.org, to find more information about OCD and anxiety during your pregnancy. And if you need to find a professional, there are resources, therapists, directories on both of those nonprofit organizations. So I hope this is helpful for those of you out there who has also or is also battling OCD and anxiety while you're pregnant. And that's what I have for you in this week's Baby Steps to a Stressless Pregnancy.